Hello, one and all, and welcome to another thrilling episode of American Government. Today, we are going to be talking about the early colonial government. In the past couple of lessons, we've been talking about how our English heritage of our government had been setting up some traditions. We talked about documents, we talked about sad kings. Mostly, we talked about stuff that was going on in England. Now, we are going to switch gears and switch hemispheres, and we are going to be talking about how the 13 colonies acted and why we generally split them up into three different categories. As a reminder, the word colony refers to a settlement in a new area, particularly one owned by a parent country elsewhere. The colonies in North America were owned by England. At least the American ones were. There were also other ones owned by France up north in Canada, and the ones down south were owned by Spain. And the people who lived in these colonies were settlers, a person who moves to an area, usually to colonize. People came from all over, not just England, but the American colonies had people from Spain, France, Sweden, Holland, and England too. So let's talk about why they decided to risk their lives and sail across the ocean. Well, some people were motivated by religion. We talked about the Pilgrims in the last lesson. And remember, these are people who wanted to move because they were fleeing religious persecution. The Pilgrims did not like the Church of England. It was also Christian, like the Pilgrims were, but they saw the Church of England as a little less pure, not as much about the Bible and more about what the king wanted to do. So they wanted to return to kind of a pure version of Christianity in their terms. So they were also called Puritans in addition to Pilgrims. Some people didn't care as much about that. They just wanted to come to America to get wealth and to get resources or perhaps to get out of debt. And then finally, people decided to come to America because they wanted a second chance at life. If someone was slowly starving to death in the streets of London, it might be worth risking their life to get to America to have a new try. Or perhaps they were fleeing the law. It would be much harder to find somebody and throw them in jail if that person ran away to the other side of the world and changed their name. So we've got a lot of different people coming for different reasons that kind of come down to what we history teachers like to call the 3 G's. God, gold, and glory. So those are the 3 G's, a mnemonic device to help you remember the 3 big reasons of why people came here. Speaking of threes, we can break down the colonies into 3 different groups. And while each colony was unique in its characteristics, why they got started, some important people who lived in each location, while they're all very individualistic, they can also be grouped together in 3 different regions based off the type of geography that was there. Whether they had easy access to rivers or farmland, whether there was a lot of mountains or rivers that separated people. We can kind of break down the colonies into the New England colonies, the Middle colonies, and the Southern colonies. You're not going to need to know individually which state belonged where, but you will need to know characteristics of the different types of colonies. So let's get started with New England. This was where most of the Pilgrims / Puritans settled, up in the northeast part of the coast, and they wanted to be kind of left alone and practice their own religions. A lot of times they were used to doing this because a lot of times back in Europe they weren't very well liked. And a lot of people disagreed with their ideas, so they're used to doing things on their own and not depending on other groups of people very much. Not everybody here was a pilgrim. Some were just looking for economic opportunities in either their fishing settlements or eventually in their factories. Their economy was not just based off of religion. Religion doesn't pay the bills, so they had jobs working in kind of early factories or perhaps fishing. Still today, New England is famous for its good seafood, and Boston quickly became its biggest city and its biggest port. That means a city with a lot of docks and a lot of shipping business going on. Here's a picture of what Boston probably looked like, and this was in 1750. You see we've already got lots of smokestacks, lots of factories, and people working on building these really big ships. So while some people moved here for religion, other people moved here to try to get into the shipping or merchant business. And they usually lived in these large, big port cities or in small towns around them. Here's a picture of what a New England town might have looked like. And it kind of reminds me of the town from the Beetlejuice movies, which I believe was set in the New England countryside. People lived pretty close together, either in the cities or in these towns, very close together. They usually used a bartering system back in the days, so they didn't bother necessarily with coining silver or things like that, and you would just exchange maybe 3 dozen eggs for a bale of hay. And they were very close and trusting of each other. The meeting house was the most important building in the town, whether that's the church or some sort of city hall-like building. And people would gather there to decide what sort of rules they were going to follow and how they were going to live their lives. So all the citizens had a say in what was going on, and that means that the government that they had chosen for most of the New England colonies was some sort of direct democracy. So remember, that was a term from our first unit. Direct democracy was used a lot in New England. Moving on to the middle colonies. In the middle colonies, we're talking about New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and in these colonies, we also had some people here moving based off of religion. Pennsylvania was started in large part thanks to the Quakers, who were, again, looking for a place to practice their religion how they wanted without any sort of people getting in their way. That was in Pennsylvania. Other people up in New York were here to make money, either shipping or manufacturing. There were a lot of different people. It was a little bit more diverse than New England was. They came from many different backgrounds, some rich, some poor, and Philadelphia was the biggest city in the middle colonies. It stands for brotherly love in Greek and was founded partially by the Quakers off the principles of living peacefully together. The Quakers were a pretty progressive group for the time period. They were totally anti-violence. They were pacifist people. They also believed in the then radical ideas of equal rights for women and an end to slavery, which was not widely accepted at the time. So the Quakers were pretty progressive, and they wanted to try to impose their ideas and live peacefully with everybody. Not everybody was a Quaker, though. Some people lived in the middle colonies, like I said, just to take part in the economy there. There was more farmland than up in New England, so we do start to have some people making their money based off of the agricultural farming practices, but we did still have industrial towns, too. For example, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the NFL team, has the name Steelers because even all the way back in the colonial days, Pittsburgh was known as a town for manufacturing goods, and in particular steel and other things as well. So we've got some factories and some agriculture going on here in the middle colonies. Now, while the Quakers focused on community and getting everybody involved, they didn't just talk about that, but they put it into practice too. This is a picture of a friendship house, which is what the Quakers called their religious buildings. And in it, anybody was allowed to stand and speak their mind. They didn't just have one priest or rabbi or imam. They allowed anybody to talk. And again, like I said, anybody includes women in the Quakers' view of the world. But other people were busy with their business. They didn't have time to attend these meetings and make decisions, so they needed somebody to act on their behalf. Which means that the government style that the middle colonies used was a mix between direct democracy and representative democracy. So we've got some people voicing their opinions, other people are just electing people to make decisions on their behalf. Last up, we've got the southern colonies. The southern colonies were places like Maryland, Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia. And for the most part, people moved here either to make money or to get out of debt. A lot of times, if you didn't have enough money to pay for your ticket across the ocean, you would have to sign up to work for 5 or 7 years as an indentured servant in order to pay off your debts. That meant that you weren't making money and you had to do whatever your boss told you to do. This was not just a practice that was exclusive to African Americans. All kinds of Europeans signed up for this, and they became indentured servants. Because in the South, they needed lots and lots of people to work on the plantations. Over time, those indentured servants eventually are replaced by enslaved people brought over from Africa. And again, the focus here is more on making money than any sort of communal, peaceful living situations. Almost everybody in the South made their living off of the agricultural economy in one way or another. Plantations were all over the place, growing tobacco, rice, and cotton. And a lot of Southern colonists argued that slavery and the violence that went with it was necessary for their economy. And they had to have it, otherwise the economy was going to shut down. Now, these large plantations were spaced far apart. They lived miles away from their neighbors and many, many miles away from those Quakers who talked bad about slavery. And they typically weren't too concerned with what they were doing up in the north. The Southerners wanted to make the laws for themselves. So, with regards to government styles, rather than have a democracy where they gave everybody the right to vote and things like that, we are going to get a little bit more specific. In the Southerners' case, they tried to adapt the Confederate style of government, where each colony is in charge of itself. They don't have to follow the rules of anybody else, and they're going to operate pretty much freely and on their own. So, why are we talking about this? In conclusion, the three regions had three different geographies, different economies, different ways of life. As a result, they had much different types of governments and much different values from one another. They created different laws. As a result, they had different lifestyles that back then were being kind of formulated in the 1600s when it was decided to allow slavery in the South. That one decision is going to have an impact on America all the way up until that. America is still dealing with the aftermath of the effects of allowing slavery in the South. And we would have slavery in the South essentially for about 300 years, and then Jim Crow laws for another 100 years after that. And America still today is dealing with the impact of and the complicated politics of race relations. So these decisions, even though they were made way before even your greatest grandparents were born, are still affecting us today. Thank you so much for paying attention. I appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next lesson.